Alrighty, I know it's wrong in my book because I have a different Bible. I like to read out of mine. Okay, Mark 9:30 through 37. They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he would not have anyone know it. For he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "Into the hands of men the Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they were silent. You're going to see why here in a second. For on the way they had discussed with one another who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." It's the word of the Lord. So we're going to start with James. And as I got into studying this thing, this was a little bit more than I really wanted to bite off, but I think we're going to go through it anyways. This chapter could, well, it was about that many pages of reading about it. The mystery of wisdom. Sought after and pursued throughout time and history. And we've talked about it here before too, wisdom. It's elusive for the most learned, and yet obtainable for the most humble and simple in life. Imperceivable to those who seek to attain it by human means or by fame, for its fame and prestige that it brings. Yet the humble find it with little effort as they seek after God. Those with true wisdom do not seek to be heard, but they're sought after. They're sought after for their opinions, for their ideas, that maybe we can glean just a little bit more for our life. But they're not the ones on the stage. They're the people that surround you, the people that don't like the limelight. And they're sought after as if they have something special. The humble. As we read James this morning, we realize that in his day, they must have also had scholars and self-proclaimed experts who flaunt their degrees, positions in life, to convince people that they are all-knowing and that they alone have the truth. James is addressing teachers and scholars who seem to be misleading people of his day in the teaching of Christ. He starts by telling us who should not be a teacher. And he's got a whole list of things. I didn't realize it when I read it, but he actually is listing all these things about who should not be a teacher. He says one who is bitter or obsessive about his or her personal ambition, whatever claims he will make in his arrogance will be false to the truth. False to the truth that he claims to teach. James uses the Greek word erythia, best I can do, to describe self-ambition. And apparently this word was translated or changed throughout the years. It meant at one time spinning for hire, so it was talking about women who would spin. You'd hire them out and they'd spin. And then it evolved into somebody who was working simply for what they can get out of it. There was no real internal drive. They just wanted to get stuff out of it. And then its final evolution, when it entered politics, which always happens, changing of meanings, it came to mean that selfish ambition, which was out for self and willing to scheme, plot, and use any means necessary to gain its end. Very interesting. I think that when things enter politics, especially words, that meanings change, and we have to be very careful about. In his day, as well as our day, that has not changed. And I think that's his opening message. Now, why does James think that this is all important? As believers and human beings, we have a tendency to seek out somebody to tell us what's right. We have a tendency to look to the experts to see what we should believe and what we should do, rather than figure it out for ourselves. This means that we need to be cautious about who we listen to. And I think it was the same in that day. You couldn't just listen to anybody on the street claiming that he knew Jesus. You needed to figure out whether that person was legitimate or not. And that's something that my entire career was something that I had to do. As a counselor, figure out where people are coming from, and I think that we need to do that now as they did then. So, James gives us 4 characteristics of a bad teacher to help us discern the truth in this passage. He gives us 4. First of all, they're fanatical. The truth it holds is unbalanced. It's one-sided and based upon opinion rather than reasoned conviction. In other words, it has ulterior motives. It's also bitter. Number 2 is bitter. It regards opponents as enemies to be defeated rather than friends to be convinced. There's generally very little conversation, very little discussion. It's always a finger in the face telling you, you must do this. And that's out of bitterness. That's a bitter teaching. 3, it's selfishly ambitious. It's more interested in being seen as truth than actually being truth. It's more interested in victory of opinion than victory for truth. And then 4th, it's arrogant. Its whole attitude is pride in what it knows rather than humility in what it doesn't know. The wise, and we'll get to what the wise, true wisdom teaches in a second here. But it's interesting, I took this all out of from William Barclay. I like his descriptions of things, and he wrote this in the 40s or 50s. So this is not something that I made up today or yesterday. Okay, this was written in the 40s and 50s. Next, James turns to wisdom, telling us about false wisdom. So these were the teachers. These are the ones that are spewing the wisdom. And now James turns to false wisdom. What are its characteristics? Number 1, it's earthly. Its standards, measures, sources, and goals, they're all of the earthly realm. Secondly, it's the characteristics of natural man. Now, natural man, we all kind of have a concept of what the natural man is. It's what we dress and comb the hair. But to the ancients, it's a little different. So to understand it, we need to look at the way that the ancients looked at man. You've heard of man having 3 components. Well, they used to look at man as body, Okay, we're all familiar with that. That's the flesh. Flesh and blood, that's the physical piece of us. But then they looked at the soul. And the soul's a little harder to grasp. They describe the soul as physical life, which we share with beasts. So they looked at the soul as the part of us that lives in this world that's on par with the animals. That's the natural man. The natural, we're equal with the beasts of the field. So our dog and us have this in common. It's primal, it's reactionary, and it's focused on our earthly life. And the Spirit separates us from the animals. The Spirit is given of God. The Spirit is what makes us the image of God. And that separates us above in a plane that allows us to see beyond the worldly and earthly things. And it allows us to interact with the world from a heavenly perspective. Earthly wisdom is no more than an animal thing. It's when a dog growls, he's scared, or he's hungry, or we might call it instinct, and we do have that. I'm not denying that we're not instinctual, and we react, and we do things sometimes that help us survive in this animal realm. The way a dog barks, snarls, and wags its tail. But the Spirit gives us the ability to rise above that primal instinctive urge to choose not to growl at somebody, choose not to pop somebody in the nose. And this is what James is talking about here with wisdom that has the characteristic of natural man. It is about an earthly thinking and not something that's above. Number 3, he lists, it's devilish. Its source is not from God, but from the devil. It produces people and situations that God does not delight in, but the devil does. Wrong teaching and false wisdom. Well, what are the outcomes of that? James has given us several different layers here. And when I first read that, I didn't get it. But when I dove in and kind of looked at each piece, he's giving, in a short passage, levels for us to take with us and to ferret out true wisdom versus false wisdom. So I found it very interesting. Thank you for asking me to do this. I always like to study more than doing this. So what are the outcomes of this wrong wisdom? It creates disorder, driving people apart. It creates strife and disruption in personal relationships. If our leaders, experts, and scholars are fomenting the above outcomes, then we must reevaluate who we're listening to. True wisdom is from God. It's not something that man can attain. We can't get it on our own. We can't get it through study. We can't get it through work, and we can't get it through experience. It truly comes from above through our spirit man connection. And that's it's kind of a, what's the word, ethereal? It's different than what we can see and feel. But we all know it's there. Now, true wisdom. Then James goes on to talk about what true wisdom is. First he talks about what it isn't. Now he's going to give you what to look for. First of all, true wisdom is pure. Pure wisdom is that which is so cleansed of ulterior motives, so cleansed of self, that it's pure enough to see God and to stand up to his scrutiny. False wisdom seeks to hide from God. It seeks to silence and hide true wisdom, whereas pure wisdom is exposed to the light of day and is not afraid of it. It's also peaceable. True wisdom creates right relationship between people, between man and man, as well as between man and God. There is a clever, evil wisdom that makes one look on his fellow man with superior contempt. We're right. Those who disagree are bad, inconsiderate, evil, and inhuman. They should be punished. Whereas true wisdom says that we can have a discussion, we can respect each other's opinions, but listen as brothers and sisters. Number 3, it's just beyond the written law. This was very interesting because we talk about justice and just and we think we know what it means, at least I did. This word in the Greek, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because you won't remember it and I won't remember it, but there's a word that James uses in the Greek that is almost untranslatable. That's what this guy said. Maybe we've deciphered it by now, but it means, and this is the best we can do, it means just beyond the written law. It's justice that does not subscribe to the law. In other words, if we find that somebody is being hurt or that the law is unjust, which we see a lot of, that wisdom goes beyond just what the law says. It gives you the wisdom to know, I guess, when to break the law. So that's kind of what that means, just beyond the law. True wisdom obeys God. It's ready and willing to listen, to hear and obey God's words when it comes to us, even if it's contrary to what we want or contrary to what earthly wisdom would tell us. It's also mercy in action. Okay, we talk about mercy, we talk about grace, and God is all those things, and we're right to talk about them. He's talking about not only mercy, but mercy in action. This allows us as Christians not only to feel for people who are being mistreated or being unjustly persecuted or who just find themselves in bad positions, even if it's of their own choosing. It allows us to feel for them, which is the mercy, but also do something, also help them, regardless of how they got there. That is mercy in action. It's also true wisdom. It's undivided. I had to take a little bit on this one. Undivided, okay. It's undivided and sure. So it sounds like it's conceit. It sounds like it's, I know what's right. But it's beyond that. It's undivided and sure, yet willing to listen and make adjustments along the way. So it's both firm and flexible at the same time. Now, this is what God does. Everything we think in terms of, well, it can't be firm and also flexible, but from in the heavenly realm, things can be these things. Jesus was man and God, which we can't possibly conceive. So wisdom is undivided, it's sure, willing to listen and adjust. It knows its mind, and it can act without hesitation or indecision. In other words, I'm sure that I'm right. I'm sure that this thing is the thing that I should do. So I can go out and do it with confidence. And I can get a good outcome. At the same time, I'm able to make adjustments along the way when new input's provided. So I'm sure that we're doing the right thing, but I'm also able to listen and move a little bit as we're going along. And the last one, I know, thank God, it's the last one. True wisdom is without hypocrisy. It's never deceptive. It never acts to mislead. It's open, it's clear, and it's honest. It does not give you something with a hope of return. And therefore, it is purely from God for you to take and to use the way you see fit, the way you hear from the Lord. Now, why do we want to seek true wisdom? Okay, it's all interesting and it's a nice theoretical conversation, and I have to admit I was intrigued. But why is it important to us? How is it important in our everyday lives? Every day we're bombarded with choices and decisions, and in certain times of our lives we have to make bigger decisions. Sometimes it's our choice that puts us there. Sometimes things just happen where we move on. And this is all part of the day that the Lord has made for us. This is not something that is special to us. Our lives are a series of movements and changes in times and changes in seasons, and some are forced on us by the world. And so it's important for us when we make decisions, because the Lord gives us that opportunity. He says, go ahead. This is your life. Make decisions. And I'm going to let you make a bad one so that you can learn. But I'm not going to let you be totally wiped out. Jesus said that the reeds, he talked about the reeds that bend, but they're not broken. So it's important that we have the wisdom. And God gave us the wisdom. He gave it to us so that we could do this. He didn't just give it to us so we could live good lives and be happy all the time. He gave us the wisdom because men, when left to themselves, do tend to be all these things that James is talking about. 2,000 years ago, it's the same as today, and all you got to do is look around. Not in here. You have to go outside and look around, because you don't see that in here. But the Bible talks about changes in times, changes in seasons. And Jesus tells us that it's important for us to recognize those changes in seasons. These changes are sometimes easy to see, but not always easy to adjust to. An example might be, well, let's say retirement. Okay, that's a big one. My choice. But I know that I'm retiring, but I'm not sure necessarily how to adjust to that. And so that's one that I can see coming, and I need to consult with the Lord to see what He wants me to do with that. Because I know I'll make wrong choices on my own. Sometimes we don't see things coming. Things just happen. Sometimes we see the things that happen, but we don't know that it's a change in our life. Sometimes we don't recognize that the season has changed. And so we try to cling to the way that it was. But it doesn't feel right, and we can't figure out why. An example of this might be, pulling from my own background just so that As a coach, there's a coach who has coached for many, many years, and it's time for him to move on and do something else. But he doesn't see it. He wants to continue doing that same thing because he's comfortable with it. He's not happy, but he's comfortable in doing it. He knows what to do. And so he presses on when the Lord is actually urging him and he's changed the season. True wisdom allows us to see beyond what this world reveals. So if this coach were in touch with the Lord, he would have heard, hey, buddy, it's time to move on, let somebody else take over. So it helps us to discern not only when the times change, but what we also need to do. And this brings us briefly to the Mark passage. I don't have a lot of time to really delve into this. I almost spent the whole time on the Mark passage because it amused me. Jesus is telling his disciples, imagine this, Jesus is saying to them, of course it's in hindsight, we know what happens now, but he's saying, listen, I'm going to die, then I'm going to be raised from the dead 3 days later. And so things are going to change for you. Well, Jesus knows what they're talking about on the way, because they don't respond, they don't know what to say. They got questions, but they're afraid to ask him. And so he goes to them, he says, so guys, what were you talking about on the way down here? After I told you I'm going to die and be raised from the dead. Well, they were talking about who was the greatest among them. Who's the greatest? That's what they were concerned with. That is a very earthly, worldly thing to be discussing. When Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, he's talking about huge changes. Well, they didn't see it. They didn't have the Holy Spirit. They didn't know that they would soon be entering a new season in their lives that would require total change in their behavior and the way they live. They just didn't get it. They were arguing about who's the greatest. I imagine that. It's crazy to me. But that's what they were doing. And then I look at my own life and I wonder sometimes, what am I worried about when I should be worried about where God's sending me and what he wants me to do? So I guess I shouldn't be too hard on those guys. They did kind of change the world. They got it at some point. So they hadn't received the Holy Spirit yet. And they couldn't recognize the change in seasons because of what Jesus did. However, we have access to that Holy Spirit that they didn't have. Through true wisdom, it allows us to perceive what's going on. Had they had the Holy Spirit and were understood wisdom, maybe they could see that, you know, guys, we need to prepare because Jesus just told us the end game. He told us the whole purpose for these 3 years that we've been wandering around. But then he also gives us the wisdom to adjust. He doesn't say, boom, you're done. Figure something out. He says, I'm changing things up. And here's my advice how you should go. Now, Julie was reading something the other day, and she sent it to me. I don't know, it was a passage in a book or something like that that sort of explained this, and I really like it because it brings it into a perspective that I can understand. This is a paraphrase of what the passage said. It talked about how life is a dance. And as we live, we have a dance that we do every day. It's a routine. And that dance matches up with the music that's playing in our life at that time. Sometimes the music changes and our dance no longer works because it doesn't fit with the music. In this image, God is the musician. God is the one who plays the music that we dance to in our lives. He controls the music. He controls the tempo. He controls when we move from one dance to another dance, the dance being our daily routine. You know, I get up at 5:30, I do the shower, I go to work, I go coach, I come home, I eat, I sit on the couch, whatever that routine is. Well, God changes that music. Now, if I'm still dancing to that same music, then it doesn't work. I don't always feel the music has changed, but I feel that something's wrong. I'm not dancing the way I used to. And so, to dance to this new music, I don't know a lot of dances, just so you know. We need help, we need advice, and we need wisdom. But first, we need to recognize that the music has changed. Has God changed the music in our life? Ask Him. He'll tell you. If so, ask Him to teach you a new dance. Ask us, I'll include myself in that. A new dance that matches the music that He's playing at this time. He may have a wonderful new dance for us, made especially for each and every one of us. For He knows the plans that He has for you, plans for good and not evil. Step out in faith, seek true wisdom, reject false wisdom, and live into this amazing new things that God has in store for each one of us. Amen.